Okay, introduction to the book of John. All right. um, I want to finish a little early because I need to tell you about the final project. Can anyone interrupt me like 10 minutes before class ends, which is around 4:15? Who wants to do that? Just, okay, go, it's time. Thank you. Great. All right. So this is a strange addition to our class on Hebrew wisdom literature, right? For two reasons, right? First of all, the Gospels are not considered to be part of the Hebrew Bible, right? Um, I am making them apart through this class for two reasons, right? Number one, the way they are written corresponds to the style of wisdom literature, right? If we look at the three main characteristics of wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible, remember anthropocentric, I can't talk, universal and subversive, right? Remember, this is the criteria, right, by which we judge that this text belongs to wisdom literature. We have the same thing here, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So in my view, right, in my analysis, they are still in the continuity of Hebrew wisdom literature, right? The other reason why I think they belong to this corpus is because they are written also by Jews, right? These Gospels were not authored by, non-Jews, or these are all, right? This is, in my view, right, the Christian Bible is still part of Jewish literature, right? Now, where it's a little ambiguous is that the book of John is also very Greek, right? And we're going to talk about that. So it has kind of a hybrid quality to it, right? And you do need to be familiar with Greek mythology, Greek philosophy to be able to grasp some of the elements of the book of John, and we'll talk about that. So two things, right, to remember: the continuity with Hebrew wisdom literature for all four Gospels, right? If you're familiar with what I mean by the Gospels, these are the four. First of all, gospel in Greek simply means good news, right? This is the Greek word evangelion. Whew. I can't write this. Okay, so there are four, right? Four testimonies, four accounts of the life and teachings of Jesus, all four of which, in my view, belong to this corpus of wisdom literature. The later writings of the Christian Bible, which are by the Apostle Paul, for me, if we want to classify them in Jewish literature, rabbinic literature, right? Apostle Paul is a Pharisee. He's a rabbi. And the way he writes is very similar to rabbinic teachings, right? So I would situate those later writings in more of the rabbinic literature. But these four Gospels clearly belong, in my view, in my analysis, to wisdom literature. Let's go over briefly why. So remember anthropocentric, right? Then we have universal, and then we have subversive, right? And here I'm talking about all four Gospels, right? Not just the book of John. We'll get there in a second. So first of all, right, anthropocentric. So clearly we have elements of that. So remember, in wisdom literature, you have the human dimension takes precedence over the divine dimension. God is not so much speaking, human beings are speaking, and they're speaking about human things, right? Here in the wisdom, in the Gospels, you have something very similar, right? You have a very human approach to spirituality embodied by Jesus, right? So he's in a way not so much talking about, so in a way he is revealing, right, who God is, but in a way he is also living it as a human being, right? He's in a way showing the path, what it means to be a human being, much more than the way he has been made as a divine figure, right? Christianity has really propped up Jesus as a God, right? I think what Jesus is really doing is showing us how to be human. What is the highest level of humanity that we can reach? So I'm going to go in that direction when I read the text. I'm going to gloss over the whole debate as to whether he's God or man, or whether we should worship him right? He has been made into a God. He is worshipped, right? If you go to churches today, there is an element of worship. My approach, right, in line with the Hebrew wisdom literature, will be rather to focus on, so I'm not even going to go there, right, in terms of this debate. I'm going to focus on how Jesus is really teaching us what it means to be human. What is the highest level of humanity that we can dare achieve? And he's really showing us the way as to what the ultimate human being, as to what we can aspire to, right, as human beings. So in that sense, right, it's a profoundly human teaching. It's not so much focused how to worship God, how to keep the rules, it's focused on what does it mean to be human and how can I develop this aspect, right? So that's the first thing, right, with regards to anthropocentric. This book is not so much concerned about how to worship God and what rules to keep and so forth. The book is concerned with how to become the most fulfilled, developed human being, right? And Jesus, in a way, is modeling this ideal that we can become as human beings, right? Okay. Second aspect, universal. So we know, right, that these texts have a universal audience, right? They are written in Greek, first of all, even though, and actually a very bad Greek. So the first three Gospels are written in horrendous Greek. Not Luke, but Matthew, Mark especially. Dreadful. So these are clearly Hebrews, right? Jews who are trying to write in Greek in order to reach a broader audience, right? So John, however, the Greek is a magnificent, right? So this is a gospel that was written a little later. But in general, right, the notion of writing them in Greek shows the intention of the author to reach a very broad audience. Greek at the time was what English is today. Everybody spoke Greek in the empire, right? From miles and miles. That was like the main language of the Roman Empire, right? So that's why, right? So you can sense the desire to branch out. Also the number 4, symbolic, right? 4 corners of the earth, right? In the Hebrew Bible, 4 symbolizes the cosmos, right? And finally, of course, we know the way that Jesus taught and the way that he interacted with Gentiles, right? Even before everything is, branched out, he was already having interactions, conversations, encounters with Gentiles. What I mean by Gentiles, right, for those of you who don't know, is simply non-Jews, right? Who were living there, right? This was a very cosmopolitan context. There were a lot of different people living in Judea at the time. So we already see, and we'll see, right, one of the interactions together when he's speaking to the Samaritan woman, who is considered to be a non-Jew, right? So we have that, right, that universal aspect. And then subversive, obviously, right? Christianity for centuries has misunderstood the subversive element of Jesus's teachings. Christianity has made it as if Jesus replaced, right, that the teachings of Jesus replace those of the Hebrew Bible, right? This is not in this way that they are subversive. They are subversive much like the book of Ruth is subversive, or the Song of Songs is subversive, right? They're still in continuity with the Hebrew tradition, but they are emphasizing what we'll show today to be the mother's house teachings, right? So in that sense, I believe the teachings of Jesus are subversive because they are teachings which are closer related to the mother's house than to the father's house. So you do have a dismantling of patriarchy, of institutional religion, in the Gospels, right? You have both happening, right? Let me write this down because this is important, right? You have a dismantling of both patriarchy, right, and institutional or temple religion, right? The religion had become highly centralized, right? In the temple, that was where everything took place, and it was really an all-male, right, dominated religion. And Jesus, in a way, is exploding these structures, right? As well as dismantling patriarchy, as we will see how he interacts with women and his approach, right, to the woman. So in that way, right, we have profoundly subversive texts, right? Jesus intentionally breaks the rules, right? Kind of like in the Song of Songs. There are very, very narrow connections between the Song of Songs and Jesus, between the woman in the Song of Songs and Jesus, right? When you read the book that I wrote on the Song of Songs, you will see these connections, right? So the breaking of the rules for the sake of love, we know this already, right? We have seen this in Ruth. When you read the book on the Song of Songs, you'll see it again. This is what he's doing, right? The expansion, right? He's trying to expand the consciousness from the narrow rigidity of, just keeping the rules to something broader, which is love, right? So we studied the book of Ruth. We are used to this by now, right? And when you read the Song of Songs, you'll see it again. This is nothing new. This is in line with the wisdom literature that we've read so far. Nothing new, right? So breaking the rules for the sake of love, right? This is in general. He intentionally does it, right? There is an intention to show that in a way Judaism had congealed into this very rigid, rule-based approach, and Jesus is kind of, exploding those structures to remind people, what really matters is love, right? Once you have that, this is really, you've achieved the highest, right? You're missing out, right, in a way. Okay, so are you seeing, is everybody clear on how these texts in general, Gospels, are in the continuity of the wisdom literature we've done so far? Everybody clear on that? Any questions on this? Anybody want to comment or has a issue? Okay. All right, so in line, right? They're in the continuity. And of course, we will see that they're in the continuity as part of these texts that I have designed to belong to the mother's house, right? Ruth, Esther, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and now we have the 4 Gospels, which I believe can be added to this house, right? So let's zoom in now on the Gospel of John. So what's interesting in this Gospel, right? Speaking of the mother's house, the Gospel of John is framed by women, right? You have the very first miracle that Jesus does is inaugurated by a woman, his mother, right? She is the one that pushes him, right, onto the scene, right? She's the one who, in a way, inaugurates his ministry, right? She's the one who kind of, encourages him, awakens him, pushes him into finally, becoming a teacher and being better known, right? So the mother initiates, and then you have so you have and women are there throughout, right? They are in general part of the discipleship, even though in the Gospels they're not mentioned as disciples. They are, right? When Jesus dies, women are there only, no men, except the author of this text, right? And then when he resurrects, right, you have a woman there at the tomb, first person to see him in, flesh and blood, right? Mary Magdalene. So you have really women throughout the text. And within the text, you have this very, very powerful conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, right? So women are really framing this particular text. So in this sense, right, you can see that Jesus is, I think Richard Rohr, who's a Catholic priest, who I really advise you read if you're into Christianity, he has written something, he says, he defines Jesus as a feminine spirit, right, in a male body. And I think that's very profound. The teachings that Jesus is giving us are teachings of the mother's house in that sense, right? He's a feminine spirit in a male body. He is really sensitive to that other path that we've been exploring together in this class. He is also part of these people teaching this other path, right? Okay. Questions, Taich, go ahead.
Well, I'd say this is more of a statement. I mean, well, after, I don't know how many people know here, but half of Book of John is pretty much talking about Jesus's death. So I think hold on, I'm so sorry. there is a scripture you're mentioning as to why and who, the difference between the Christ and Yahweh. There's actually a very interesting scripture that brought out. He says, I have not, damn, I can't find it. Sorry, real quickly. He says, I have not, because I have not sent here to judge, rather, Jesus answered, oh, here we go. Nope, doesn't matter, I can't find it right now. But Jesus says, the reason why he's not like the God, quote unquote, I hear this, that the God of the Greek scriptures is much nicer than the God of the Hebrew scriptures. The reason behind it, they say that pretty much they don't know, but it says in one of the verses, like again, I forget where it is, he says, I am not here to judge. So I have been sent here to give my life, not to be a judge. Therefore, that's not why it seems that he's doesn't have God's qualities. Rather, he doesn't have the job that God sent him to
Very
do.
nicely put, right? I like that.
I'm sorry it took so much time because I was looking through it, couldn't find it.
Yeah, so I love the way you mentioned this quote, right? Jesus says, I'm not here to judge, which connects it to Ecclesiastes, who also refuses to judge, right? So you're showing us again how deeply connected these teachings are with the texts we've studied so far. There are so many connections. Ecclesiastes is very, very connected, and the Song of Songs, in my view, also, right? So excellent, right? So okay, so here we are, right? Again in the mother's house, new teaching, new spiritual path, right? A feminine path again, right? So now zooming in a little bit on the author of the Book of John, right? So this particular book, right? I'm discovering it actually along with you guys, right? I've never taught it. I haven't read it that much. I prepared it for this class, right? But when I was reading it, I got the sense that this was a book of secrets, right? The book is written, the stories, right, are not just stories. It's not just a historical narrative, the Book of John. The Book of John, every story is a symbol for something, it has a teaching, right? Every story is symbolic, right? You have to read it like that. So any story he's telling is not just rendering what happened that day. The way he tells the story, we are invited to interpret and draw from the story spiritual lessons, right? So every story in a way is like a parable, right? So so for me, as I was reading the Book of John, it felt like this was a book of mysteries, of secrets, similar to what the Greek mystery religions at the time were doing, where you cannot really enter this unless you are initiated, right? And it's true, I believe that this book can be completely misunderstood unless you have the right mindset, right? So it's really, we need to realize how this book is about to reveal something very profound to us, right? About what it means to be human, of course. It was written, right? Tradition wills it that it was written by the disciple John, who knew Jesus, right? Who was very close to him. And in the text, he refers to himself as the beloved, right? So we are here in mystical literature. So yes, I think it's plausible that John could have written this book, right? Even though the Greek is magnificent, let us remember that John was exiled for a long time on the Greek island of Patmos. So he could have written this gospel later in his life, right? The gospel also, we'll talk a little bit about the role of John as a narrator. He takes a lot of space, actually, in the text. We'll talk about this in a second. But the main idea, right, of this book, which I feel is the guiding thread and which connects it to the mother's house, in my view, is this teaching of the sacred marriage again, but this time between humanity and God. Okay, so this is, I believe, this is the core. This is the essence of the book, right? We are going to learn again about the sacred marriage, but this time not between, a man and a woman like we've been studying, right? Adam and Eve, Ruth and Boaz, the Shulamite, right? Esther and the king. We are now entering something much more profound, which is really the marriage between the humanity, right, human beings and God. And this is not a foreign idea to Judaism, of course, right? Since in Judaism already in the Hebrew text, right, in the prophets, you also have this idea that Israel is the bride and God is the bridegroom. So nothing new, right? This is not a new idea that you can imagine, right? That the relationship between human beings and God can be imagined as a marriage, right? So nothing new there, except that now in this text, we are going to go much deeper than just covenant. We're going to go into the actual consummation of the marriage. In other words, this text is going to talk about the possibility, the extraordinary possibility that God can enter us, right? And this is where John leaves everyone in the dust, right? Because we have this idea of covenant in Hebrew thought as a kind of contract. You do this, I do that. You do this, I do that. We never talk about the actual consummation. In John, we are in the consummation between the human beings and God. In other words, this text is going to describe the process, the conditions of possibility of God entering us and dwelling within us. God, right? This is unheard of, right? Both in Greek and Hebrew thought of the time, right? The Greeks, for them, the gods were up there playing games, right? There is no God going to enter you, except in the cult of Dionysus. I'll refer to it. Dionysus, the god of wine, interestingly. There are connections, right? Hebrew thought, of course, this idea of God entering, on the one hand is extraordinary, on the other hand is there, right? First of all, it's extraordinary because God is holy. What is this? He's not going to merge with me, right? That's unheard of, right? On the other hand, right, when you have certain passages in the prophets, remember, these were seers. They had a powerful intuition. When the prophet Ezekiel talks about what's the text? The renewal of the heart and giving a new heart, a new spirit, right? This is something internal, right? David also had an intuition of this, right? But here, John is being very, very clear that this renewal is coming through the actual penetration of the divine essence within us. This is the teaching. This is the main idea of the book of John. And this can seem shocking, right? And it is. This is the first time in the history of humanity that God can enter us and dwell there, right? This is, we knew we had God's spirit, God's breath, but this is next level, right? So this, in my view, is the main teaching of the book. Very feminine teaching, right? This idea, and we have the feminine position, right? We are receiving, right? So in that sense, it's a book which belongs to the mother's house and which is shocking if you were to open it in the father's house, right? So Ahmad is saying, is John seen as a mystic? Yes, this book, it belongs, in my view, to the mystical literature. You have similar writings with Rumi, right? When Rumi starts to write, same, right? Ahmad studied Rumi with me, but the rest of you didn't, right? This is a Muslim mystic, right? This is the same idea of God being the lover, right? And I am the beloved, or vice versa, right? So this is the main idea of the book. Later in Judaism, you have a similar development when you have in medieval Judaism, in the study of the Kabbalah, right? You have a text which students of the Kabbalah are describing the loving union between them and what they call the Shekhinah. Let me explain, which is the feminine aspect of God, right? So there is, in later Judaism, the development of this possibility, right? Extraordinary possibility of a marriage, of a consummation, of a union between the student, right? Between a human being and God, right? And so in later Jewish writings, in Kabbalistic writings, you do have a lot of texts which talk about, right, the Kabbalist uniting with God, with the female part of God, right, and so forth. So, and of course you have this in Christianity, obviously, and then you have this in Islam, right? With the poetry of Rumi and Al-Ghazali and so forth, right? So this idea really took shape, right? It really, not took shape, but it took hold, right? What John is talking about, unheard of before, but really then was developed in all three monotheisms, right? So we do have, so it's extraordinary, but at the same time, it was welcomed to a certain degree, right? Okay, so great. So let's go a little bit. So any questions so far on this notion of this sacred marriage, the notion that God can enter us and dwell within us and be in us, of a loving union between God and humanity, which is way beyond just responsibilities, right, to each other, like the covenant, right, that we have in the Hebrew Bible. You do this, I do this. This is the actual union, right, with God, consummation. Any questions on this crazy idea? Great. Now, if you understand the text like this, if you understand that this is the main teaching of Jesus, to teach us how to do that, right? And to embody that sacred marriage, then now we can understand why he underwent so many problems as he was teaching, right? So if the main, let me say it again, right? If the main teaching is about this oneness with God, right? Which he is embodying and which we can actually also experience, right? If we receive his teaching. Now we can understand certain misunderstandings that occur in the text, right? Where I think it's 3 or 4 times he's about to be stoned, right? For what he's saying. People think he's saying, I am God, right? But when we see that what he's teaching is not that, he's teaching, I am one with God. Different, right, than I am God. I have become one with God. I have received the divine essence. I have received the divine presence. And then he says several times, me and the Father are one, right? And people immediately think when he says that, oh, he's claiming, right, divinity. No, he's talking about this sacred marriage, right? I think this will really help dispel a lot of misunderstandings if we understand that the main teaching of Jesus and what he was trying to embody was this oneness with God, or marriage, union with God, union between the divine and the human, right? And so anytime you hear him say things like, you know, I and the Father are one, he is not claiming divinity. He is actually saying we are one in the sense of a sacred marriage, and all of you can also experience this, right? Granik, question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you see a similar kind of idea in the rabbinic conception of Song of Songs, like how they take it as sort of a metaphor for like the love affair between. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is why I was saying the Song of Songs is the closest to this text, right? And when you read the book, you'll see that I have the last chapter where I actually make connections between. But yes, if you're familiar with the Song of Songs, the rabbis interpreted it as as talking about the relationship between human beings and God. But this is a very intimate relationship, right? If God is the man and the woman in the Song of Songs is Israel, right? And here they are, right? Really in this constantly making love, right? We are here implying that there is this possibility. So yes, the Song of Songs is the best precursor, right, for what John is trying to articulate, or for what Jesus eventually embodied, right? So yes, very nice connection, Granik. Great. Okay, so now, yeah, what else did I want to say? Yeah, we'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so I want to go now into 4 points, I believe, yeah, 4 points where distinctions between father's house, mother's house, spirituality, and seeing how the teachings of Jesus fall under the mother's house category, right? So being more specific now, so you can really have a sense of how to shift your mindset before you enter the text, right? I'm preparing you to enter mother's house mindset so that you can really enjoy the text when you enter it. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. Number 1, holiness versus proximity. I spelled it wrong. I hope you can figure that out. Number 2, Jerusalem versus countryside. Number 3, covenant versus union or consummation. And number 4, temple versus body. Okay? So when you understand these 4 points, you will really see the shift that is taking place here. What path, right? What alternative spiritual path Jesus is trying to open up for his contemporaries, right? And so you'll be able to very much better understand what he's trying to do, right? It's very easy to misunderstand him. Okay, holiness versus, what did I say, union? Okay, so we know already in the Hebrew Bible, outside of the wisdom text, right? God is holy, meaning separate, you don't go near, right? We remember the story when God was about to reveal himself on Mount Sinai. There was a border, right, drawn around the mountain, and if anyone crossed that border, they would die, right? We have in the temple the Holy of Holies, where no one can enter except the high priest once a year, right? So clearly in the Hebrew Bible, you really have this emphasis on God is, you know, you don't touch, you don't enter, you don't penetrate, right? Now in this text, you have the reversal, right? And by now, you should be used to these reversals, right? If you have developed mother's house mentality, you're not troubled by these reversals. Reversal, God becomes flesh, enters us. We cannot enter God, but God can enter us, right? This is the right, when it says, when the text says God becomes flesh, what is it saying? Right? Saying God enters us. So yes, the text agrees, right? We cannot enter God or divine territory, right? But what stops God, right, from entering us? But God can enter us, right? So in that sense, right, you have this this proximity of God, which is embodied, right, by Jesus himself, right, who is in a way carrying the Father in him, right, as he says, right? So, and then you just look at the way that Jesus himself, you know, inhabits the world, right? He's constantly crossing over borders, right? He's not supposed to touch this, he touches it. He's not supposed to go there, he goes there. Not supposed to talk to this person, he'll talk, right? So he's constantly breaking not just the rules, but breaking or exploding the barriers that separate people, right? This is one of the main teachings, I think, that he's trying to embody, right? The breaking of barriers in order to touch. I had a moment of illumination once about this notion of proximity. I was sitting in a synagogue and we were studying a very obscure text in the book of Leviticus. And it was a text about how the priest, when he's done with his work, he has to take off his garments and leave them in the temple and then change, go home. And we were just commenting on why he does that. Well, because the garments are holy, so they cannot go out in the street, right? They have to be kept clean, right, in the precincts of the temple. And as the rabbi was talking about this, right, I had a vision, not a vision, but I had an image pop up in my mind. Of a story in the Gospels where Jesus is walking in a big crowd, everybody pushing against him, and a woman touches his garment, right, and is healed from a disease that she had been carrying for 5 years, right? So the parallel between the two images, right, the priest shedding his garment, keeping it in the temple, so the holy does not enter the unholy, right? And here we have the holy within the throng, within the marketplace, touched by everyone, right? This is the shift, right? On the one hand, the holy remains separate. On the other, the holy enters daily life. The holy is seen in the streets. The holy is touched, right? This is, I think, one of the main, for me, the main distinctions, right? The reversal, right? That is operated here in the Gospels. Very similar, by the way, this holy entering the unholy, right? Ruth, right? Entering the land of Israel. This is very similar, right? This notion of the unholy penetrating the holy is not too distant from the Hebrew Bible, right? We have this in the book of Ruth. Okay, so that's the first, right? First shift you have to make, right? Can we envision this? Yes, we cannot go and touch the holy, but perhaps the holy can touch us, right? I guess that's how I would say it, right? We cannot go and touch the holy, right? But perhaps the holy can touch us in that sense, right? So in a way, Jesus is embodying this revolutionary proximity of the holy, this revolutionary incarnation of the divine in the flesh, right? So yeah, very, very new way of thinking, right? Okay, second point, Jerusalem versus the countryside. So there is a clear distinction in the book, actually, between the teachings of Jesus and where he chooses to teach and the teachings of the rabbis of the time, right? And this is a dialectic which is throughout the book. At the time, the rabbis taught in the temple, right? This was where, or the priests, right? Or the Pharisees taught in the temple. Let me get some of these words, right? Pharisee was simply the equivalent of rabbis today, right? They taught, they mostly taught, right? And then you have the priests, which is different. We don't have those anymore, right? They ministered in the temple. We don't have a temple, so there's no more priests. There's still, however, the descendants of Pharisees is the rabbis today. Same, very, very, there's a continuity, right? Absolutely. So you have, right, the Pharisees taught mostly in the precincts of the temple. Jesus is, however, he is teaching everywhere. Right? He is teaching on the mountain. He's teaching on a boat. He's teaching in the countryside. He's teaching in a wedding. He's teaching at a party, right? So you have this kind of a complete distinction, right, between the two types of teachers, right? On the one hand, you have the elites, and then you have Jesus. And we'll talk about this in a second when we talk about the distinction between Galileans and Judeans. And we'll see more clearly how bizarre it was, what Jesus was doing, right, to the eyes of the elites, the intellectual elites. So he is, you know, and this should remind us, of course, of the mother's house where all the important events are taking place in the mundane, right? Ruth, everything takes place in the fields, in the threshing floor. Song of Songs, everything's taking place in nature, right? So you have a similar, right, approach to spirituality, right? Jesus is part of the natural world. He's not part of the intellectual elites. He chooses to teach by the sea, by the well, on the mountain, at the dinner table, right, and so forth. And his teachings often have elements of nature incorporated in them, right? So he's very different. No text, right? Most of the rabbis at the time, you have a text, you have a scripture, you have a commentary, you have a discussion. No text, no script, right? He was really very, very different in his approach, much more improvising. And in fact, he was noticed precisely because he didn't quote anyone before him. He was just coming from him, right? Very spontaneous approach, right? Okay. Then we get the third point, right? Covenant versus union or consummation. We talked about this, right? This is again the notion, the distinction, right, between the covenant approach, right, which was typical in the Hebrew Bible. In other words, the covenant is when God made a covenant with Israel on Mount Sinai, he had his commandments, and then when Israel keeps the commandments, he blesses them. So it's a contract, right? And in general, this is how the relationship is viewed, except in the Song of Songs, right? And of course, here in the book of John, right, you have something much more intimate going on than that, right? You have the actual possession by God of our bodies, right? You have this moment of consummation, of oneness with God, right? And again, this is where Jesus will lose his audience most of the time when he's trying to articulate this crazy idea, right? Good. And now finally, last difference, temple versus body. So we know at the time the only place to worship God was really the temple in Jerusalem, right? In our text, we start to see a subtle displacement from the temple to the human body. In other words, what do I mean by that? It's no more the temple now that becomes the place where God resides, but now the human body becomes a kind of temple. Jesus is making the shift from kind of material temple in stone and metal, right? And he's saying there is now, we need to see the temple. The concept of temple must be broadened to every human body. The human body itself is a temple wherein God's presence can dwell and where God can be encountered. And so this shift is very new at the time. Now we're maybe a little more used to it. In the last synagogue I sat in, they were singing the song, Lord, Make Me a Sanctuary, which is actually a Christian song. I don't know why they sing this song there. But, right, so we have kind of this idea of, floating around. But, right, this idea that the body now is the new temple. At the time, this is incredible, right? What do you mean? What does this mean? In a way, right, this shift was necessary. What happens when the temple is destroyed? God, and we have to measure, by the way, in the Jewish psyche, collective psyche, when the temple was destroyed, what it meant, it was not just a nice building was destroyed. It meant the presence of God on earth was demolished. No more presence. This was in the concept, in the psyche of Jews. The temple was the place where God resides on earth. You destroy the temple, no more dwelling place. God goes back where he came from, right? So Jesus, in a way, seems to be anticipating a new era. In this sense, he's a visionary. He's saying, okay, soon, he's sensing this, and we know he had an intuition of this destruction, right, of the temple. He mentions it several times, right? What then, right? Well, then we are temples, right? We can become the place where God himself dwells. This is the main teaching. This is, if you understand this and if you can grasp this, you're good, right? There's nothing else than this idea that, now what's interesting, right, is that we will learn in the Gospels in general. Oh, sorry, let me just get Pierre-Antoine first. Go ahead, Pierre-Antoine.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because we were talking about how Peter, just a lot of the Pharisees and Gentiles, they didn't eat certain foods and whatnot, and I always thought it was because it was what God told them not to do, because it's impure, so they were trying to keep their body clean away from impure food. So I thought that was kind of similarly saying not that the body is a temple, but your body is supposed to be clean and sanctified. So isn't that similar ideas? Or
yes, absolutely, right? The whole emphasis on purity of the body, right? Don't touch the dead, or keep yourself clean of unclean foods and so forth, is really a preparation, right? But what John is saying is that's preparation for what? Preparation for this kind of descent of God into the human body. This is really what he's talking about. Okay. And by the way, nothing special. Jesus says, I have this, right? God has descended on me, dwells in me. He's basically saying, I'm not special. All of us should be doing this, having this experience, right? In that sense, this teaching is profoundly human, right? Yeah, absolutely. I think Paul later on develops this notion of the temple, and he talks about keeping oneself pure because one is the temple of God, right? So he goes in that direction, absolutely. Okay, now what's interesting, right, is that, Stage, you have a quick question, go ahead.
Actually, it's not a question, as it is a statement to correct Pierre. I can never say your name. That is completely untrue. Many times Jesus says, he's talking about the purity of man. Unless you are pure, you are pure, you cannot come to me because I am holy. Yeah. He constantly speaks of holiness about himself and the Father who sent him. Never does Jesus sway and say that that he's doing what God does not want him to do. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you read chapters 1 through 12, chapters 1 through 13. Afterwards, it's just talking about what happens after he's been betrayed. Jesus literally speaks all the time saying that he says, I am doing what my Father has told me to do. I am saying what my Father. So I'm sorry, I just had to bring that up because that is completely untrue. I don't want to.
I didn't say anything. I was just talking about in terms of how a lot of Jewish people back in the day, like they were saying, like they cannot eat certain things because
Yeah, I'm
it's
just saying that Jesus was
Okay,
not
guys,
one of
thank
them
you.
that.
Thank you. That's enough.
Sorry. Sorry.
I know it's tempting. All right, yes, I agree with Pierre-Antoine. I don't think you caught completely what Pierre-Antoine was saying, but it's okay. You guys can talk afterwards during the discussion. Okay, now I want to add something about this notion of the body as temple, right? Not anybody, right? Like Sage is saying right now, there is a certain preparation. What we're going to learn in the text, right, is that sacrifice, right, the ability to sacrifice, and we're going to talk about what that means, right, in a second, is what creates this proximity. This is a very Jewish idea, right? In fact, in Judaism, the word for sacrifice, right, which is in Hebrew korban, right, is a root for the word proximity, which is lekarev, right? This is the verb version. So it's the same. Lekarev is the verb. Korban is the noun. Same root. Karav, right? We write it like this, right? So we have little Hebrew now, right? So this idea of sacrifice as that which brings the presence of God, right? This is why the Hebrews would sacrifice an animal to bring the presence of God. Now, in a way, Jesus is internalizing this teaching. He's saying we are to become sacrificial in our bodies. In other words, we are to learn to offer ourselves to each other like a sacrifice, right? And then we shall be powerfully inhabited by the divine presence. Are you following how masterful this is, right? He's taking this outside ritual, right? You bring the sacrifice, God comes close. He's internalizing it and saying, we are now the sacrifice. And of course, I am now the sacrifice, he says, right? Paving the way for us. Now, this is not a unique thing, what he did. We are supposed to follow in the footsteps. Doesn't mean we die, but it means we live sacrificially. What does it mean to live sacrificially? We offer our lives to others, right? We offer ourselves to others no matter how hard it is, right? When we live sacrificially in this way, the teaching goes that we will draw the presence of God powerfully into our own lives, right? So there is a certain positioning our bodies have to adopt to receive, right, the divine glory or the divine presence, right? Just like the temple, when you offered a sacrifice in the temple, God's glory fell on the temple. Now, likewise, as when we live sacrificially, we receive the glory of God in our lives, right? So in Christianity, there's a lot of talk about baptism of the Spirit. And so you can go and have a, charismatic preacher push you to the ground, boom, you're filled with the Spirit. In a way, this makes sense, but here we are talking about the mechanism. How to be filled by God is the attitude of sacrifice, ongoing, right? Because you can receive a momentary rush of the Spirit, but to sustain it, the life itself, the whole body has to become sacrificial, and at that moment you sustain this presence, right? Am I making sense when I talk about the internalization of the sacrifice? Is this making sense? Okay, so this is very, this is far out, right? This is, if you're coming from a Jewish background, it's far out, but it should sound familiar. It's not completely far out because he's using the whole tradition of the whole Hebrew tradition and kind of transforming it, shifting the meaning, right? Shifting it around, very mother's house style, right? So this is very important to realize, right? That this ability to sacrifice, by which John means this total surrender to God, right? I do not will anything, I just will that which God wills through me, right? This attitude, which is the attitude of sacrifice, is what will allow this divine glory or cloud or Shekhinah to fall upon us. Only when we are able to completely surrender our will to a greater will, i.e. sacrifice, do we bring on the proximity. So there is a certain positioning that is, and of course Jesus, right, he is embodying this attitude, right? This is his positioning throughout the text, and this is why, in a way, he is so powerfully inhabited, right, by the divine presence. Okay, any questions on these 4 points, on the shift that he's making from the father's house to the mother's house? You can see how he is reversing everything. It's an acrobatic text, right? Everything is on its head here in this text. You have to have a very nimble mind, I think, to make the transition from Judaism to Christianity, or at least from the Hebrew Bible to these texts, right? It takes a very acrobatic mind to be able to see how the author is in a way retelling the spiritual path in this mother's house language, right? So let me repeat, right? So here we have separation versus all of a sudden the holiness. Now we cannot touch the holy, but the holy can touch us. That's the first mind-blowing shift. Mind-blowing shift number two. That one's not so mind-blowing. The notion of a spiritual path to be found outside of the walls of Jerusalem, right? Number three, this notion of intimate union with God, which is not unfamiliar if you've read the Song of Songs, obviously. And then temple versus body, right? We become the temple, we become the sacrifice, right? This is how, in a way, God's presence is preserved on the earth, even though the temple has been destroyed. Remember, Jesus is foreseeing this destruction. What will happen then to the divine presence? And this is why he is urgently teaching, right, the people around him. We now must become the temple. We now must become the sacrifice. We must internalize these truths for the presence of God to continue to dwell on the earth. This is how urgent this teaching is, right? We are on the verge, really, of the end of Jewish history, right? The destruction of the Second Temple is the end of Jewish history. Everything is destroyed. And so he's intuiting this almost apocalyptic time, and he's saying this is how we need to rethink things for the presence of the divine to continue to endure on the earth. Otherwise, it's going to just disperse, right? So this is the urgency. Okay. Now, quickly on the language of this text. How many of you read it already? I'm curious. Put your hand in the screen. Okay. Now, I should have actually asked you. Maybe we have time. No, let me not. Let me not do that. If you, personally, right, when I read the text, first of all, this has been rated the most anti-Semitic gospel of the whole four gospels, right? So there is an issue with the language here. There is the expression overall, and if you're a Christian, you didn't notice this, but if you're a Jew, certainly you did. The Jews this, the Jews that, always the bad guy, right? And in fact, this text has been used, right, during the Inquisition to justify the persecution of Jews, right? Because you have this gospel constantly putting the Jews in the worst light possible, right? So we have to look at this concept of the Jews. And then we'll look a little bit at how much place the narrator is taking and how much is really Jesus's actual words, right? We'll talk about this in a second. So first of all, to understand this concept, the Jews, which is a poor translation, I believe, okay, who is it that translated it so much better? Isaac Stern. No, not Isaac Stern. Do I have this here? Okay, I'll bring it later. Yeah. So there's one translation which translates the Judeans, and this is much more accurate. So let me explain. At the time, in the land of Israel, you had two kinds of people. You had the intellectuals and the peasants. I'm just caricaturing, right? The intellectuals were all centered. It's like, you know, if you're like in New York and then you're like outside. Or it actually doesn't work because the state of New York is pretty, you know, it's pretty similar population. But let's take any American state. So I come from Michigan, so you have, even the capital of Michigan doesn't work. You have like a university town, right? And then you have the rest, right? Or New York and Alabama. Sure, let's go there. Okay, so here in the land of Israel at the time, you had the intellectual elites gathered around Jerusalem. This was the center of civilization. And then you had the peasants who were in Galilee. So you had two regions. You had Galilee, which is basically like, you know, the deep south or deep America or, you know, whatever. You know, the countryside. Most people were not that, you know, educated and so forth. And then you had Judea, which is basically where Jerusalem was, and this is the intellectuals. The liberals, if you want to look at it in terms of America, you can have like blue and red. Okay, the blue states, the red states. If you go to a state like North Carolina, I know I'm creating problems right now. This is a great explanation. I used to live in North Carolina. The cities were blue, and the rest was red. Okay, so the cities were more like intellectual, liberal, you know, blah blah blah. And then the rest was more red, like more, you know, kind of more countryside mentality. Okay, great. I've destroyed myself right now. Okay, this is like, if anyone takes this, and I cannot run for office after this lecture. Clearly. Okay, this was kind of just trying to break it down, right? So Galilee was actually despised a little bit by the Judeans, because Galilee was like all the rednecks, basically, right? And so they were the elites, and they were really good. It's true. They were really good. I mean, if you just look at rabbinic literature, I mean, these were minds, right? These were real minds over there in Judea. And then Galilee is like the rednecks. They kind of, you know, they're fishermen or they're whatever, right? And Jesus, basically a redneck, right, arrives on the scene and starts teaching. I mean, imagine, right? Imagine if a hillbilly comes up from, I don't know, the Appalachians and starts teaching in New York City. We're going to be like, what the hell? Like, who are you? This was the effect, right? So when the text talks about the Jews, actually mentioning the Judeans, these intellectual elites, which were made up by the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the time, right? They were the elites. It's not talking about the Jews, okay? Let's make it clear, right? So poor translation, really. Now, when you get in the text and you start reading, and this is a text which, you know, I loved and hated at the same time when I first started reading it. I loved it for all of these really mystical images of, you know, like all of the very beautiful stories which have symbolic meaning. But then there's so much anger in this text, right? There's so much dichotomy, like us, them, the children of light, the children of darkness, you guys will go to hell and we will, right? There's a lot of like kind of binary thinking that we thought we had overcome with Ecclesiastes. There's a lot of us, them, light, darkness, right? And so, you know, it's a very aggressive text, right? Now, when you remember who wrote the text, it starts to make sense. Anybody know what was the other name for John in the Gospels? He had a nickname. Jesus had given him a nickname. Anybody know what was the nickname that Jesus gave John? Anybody remember? Who knows their Bible here? Don't disappoint me. Where are my Christians? Nobody remember the nickname that Jesus gave John? He was a favorite, true. He had a nickname. Let me refresh your memory. At one point, this is a true story. I mean, a story in the Gospels, right? Jesus is walking. You know, he's looking for a place to stay. They've walked all day. They're starving. They're tired, and they stop at a village. And the villagers are like, "No, we don't want to receive you. Go to hell." And at that moment, John and his brother, James, right, go to Jesus and they're like, please, let us just pray to God. Just allow this. Let's pray to God that thunder and lightning destroy this village. Let's do this, right? And Jesus, you know, kind of brushes them off and says, you know, I forget what he says, some smart ass comment, right, about not doing that, right? So John and his brother James, pretty aggressive, right? The village refuses to, and now they want to, right, basically bring down the fire from heaven on that village and consume it completely. Now do we remember the nickname that Jesus had for both of these, the two brothers, John and James? Pierre-Antoine, you want to try?
Wasn't it like thunder, like he called them the brothers of thunder and lightning?
Yes, yeah. The sons of thunder. So the character of John is already very temperamental, right? He's a man who can get easily very angry, right? At the same time, and this is what's beautiful about this gospel, he's very passionate and loving. So in this text, you have on the one hand amazing insights into becoming the beloved of God, right? He was himself the beloved. And then you have these moments of rage and these rants, right? So this is the author, right? This is the author seeping through the personality of the author. And in fact, a lot of the text, when you read it, seems to be, he begins with Jesus talking a few words and then he continues. If you read the text, especially the one, I mean, any text, Jesus will say a few words, give an image in the typical style, very succinct, and then you'll have a lot of theology. And then us, them, darkness, light. At that moment, you know that the narrator has taken over. And this happens over and over again in the book. The narrator, John, takes over and interprets and does theology in his style, which is very aggressive, right? So this can account for these moments of us, them, and kind of, being, what's the word I used here? I had this polemic. He's very polemic, constantly creating dissent, right? So you have to be able to distinguish in the text, and knowing the other teachings of Jesus and the way he taught in the other four gospels can help you filter out when is it that Jesus is talking, when is it that John takes over and does theology and becomes polemic, right? So this will help you also try to focus on, right, as soon as the text becomes polemic, you know that John has taken over because that's his mindset, right? So in the text, when we study it, we'll focus on what I perceive or hopefully interpret to be actual Jesus's words, and then we'll leave out the theology because it doesn't interest us here. Any questions so far before I conclude on the expression Son of Man, Son of God? That's throughout the text. Okay. All right. So knowing this should help a little bit, this notion of Galileans, Judeans, the way that John kind of takes over some of the narrative and does his own theology. And by the way, this text, I have to say, this gospel, when you compare it to the other gospels, right? It's very, very doctored. What I mean by that is that the interpretation is very already taking place. This text is really, I believe, an interpretation of the teachings of Jesus. It's not so much the raw occurrence of Jesus' teaching. There is already so much interpretation, and the raw teachings of Jesus are given form in this text. The text is heavily doctored, right? But I do get the sense, as even though most of it is not what Jesus actually said, right? The essence is there. I think John really caught on to the core, and he is able to bring this to us, even though it's not the actual, I believe, compared to the other text, the actual words. If you want to get the actual, the closest, right, to what actually happened, you need to read the Gospel of Mark. This is in my view, this is an eyewitness who wrote this, right? And it's very close to what actually happened. And you can see how John has really moved very far away from that original gospel and is already interpreting. But I believe the interpretation is capturing very nicely the essential teaching, which is this sacred marriage, right? Okay, thank you, Goldstein. Yes. All right, two things before I go into the final project. The expression Son of Man, Son of God is going to be intriguing to some of you. He uses it a lot. So let me explain what he's alluding to. Son of Man, at the time, people knew this expression from the book of Daniel. People were familiar with the book of Daniel more than now. We know this from the Apocryph writings. All the writings around that time mention the book of Daniel and the expression Son of Man, which was understood to be a messianic figure, right? So the Son of Man in the book of Daniel is the Messiah, and the literature, apocryphal literature, what I mean by that is the literature around the Gospels, right? Apocryphal literature, this is the literature surrounding the Gospels, are all talking about the Messianic era, because this was the time that Daniel predicted around that time, and they use the Son of Man, the expression, to talk about the Messiah, right? Now, the Son of Man in Daniel is supposed to be a powerful royal figure coming on the clouds, right? And when we go to the book of John, honestly, there's no clouds, there's no royalty, there's this hillbilly instead, right? Redneck from Galilee. So in a way, our gospel, right, is subverting the concept of the Son of Man, right? Instead of a powerful figure, we have this kind of very humble, kind of unassuming peasant, right? So he's kind of like shifting the meaning of what it means to be the Son of Man. Now, what's interesting is he does the same with the expression Son of God. Son of God, of course, is in the Hebrew Bible, but it's also in the Greek literature. The Son of God, anybody know who was the only Son of God during the era that Jesus is living in? Only one. This is, remember, at the time of the Roman Empire? No. He's of course, he's the son of a god, but the expression son of God, the title son of God, who is the only one could carry this title in the Roman Empire? Caesar, absolutely. Son of God was the technical title for Caesar. Now, when Jesus is talking about Son of God, and then you see the life trajectory of this Son of God, which ends in death, he's also subverting that category, right? So both the royal Son of Man and the powerful Son of God, these two categories of, powerful figures, right, that are supposed to save the world, is subverted in our text, right? They are in a way dismantled, right? What we think of them, right? We think of the Son of God as the Roman Emperor, right? The one who has all power, and here the Son of God has no power, right? Son of Man coming on the clouds, and here the Son of Man is hillbilly, right? Okay. So that's just to help you a little bit to see how he's using these concepts, but he's playing with them, toying with them, right? Remember, Jesus is a quite intelligent person, very witty. We miss often the irony, the wit, right, that is operating in many of his teachings, right? And here he's kind of toying with these concepts and putting them upside down, right? Okay, great. Any questions before we talk about the project? Anybody have something they want to clarify? Okay, no stage. Except stage. I've heard you twice already. Anybody else? Sage, you can stay after class if you want. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the final project. I'm going to keep the recording on so whoever missed the class can get this information. So I've organized myself a little bit till the end of the semester. And here is the plan, kind of. We're going to finish the book of John, what's that date? The first week of May. So we're going to have 4 sessions on the book of John. And then we have 3 more sessions left, May 11, May 13, and May 20, which is supposed to be your final exam. I'm going to use that, right? These sessions, I would like to do an Esther workshop, Book of Esther, for women only, this time. So it will be a secretive class. Men, however, I give you a compensation. Your assignment to compensate will be to read the book, The Song of Songs, that I wrote, and to write me a review on Amazon. Okay, that will be your task. Now, I understand the book selling. How many of you bought the book? Anybody bought the book already? Just checking. Okay, if you didn't, you're in trouble because the price quadrupled. I hate it when they do that. So I'm going to put a PDF of it so you can read it. I'm going to get a PDF made of it so you can read it. Ideally, you can buy it, but right now I can't afford it. So I understand if you can't. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have this women-only Esther kind of workshop, and I'm going to hash out the book of Esther. I'll record it so you guys can totally listen to it if you want to, if you want to get a peek into our discussion, but I want to have it more like, I want to see what it's like. And then you guys have the book. Now, women, if you want extra credits, you can do, you can read the book too and give me a review on Amazon. So obviously, right, I think everyone should read this book. It's very, very important, I think, the book is really talking, what I'm doing in the book is taking the Song of Songs as kind of a guide to help us navigate relationships. So it's a very down-to-earth approach, right? I'm not looking at it in the mystical sense. I'm looking at it as what can I learn from this woman? What wisdom can I gain in my own relationships from the way that she navigates her own very difficult relationship, right? If you look at the man in the Song of Songs, he's not easy. It's not easy to be with him. And she is in a way pretty miserable most of the time. I mean, she's both ecstatic and miserable, right? But she's having a hard time with this guy, right? So I took the book and I realized as I was reading it and teaching it in class that there is a lot of hidden wisdom, hidden gems that we can learn from her, that she's learning along the way as to how to navigate our own relationships. So it's a very practical book, right? And it's written, I meant to write it to a lay audience, even though people tell me it's still too intellectual, but you guys should be fine. So I really invite all of you to read it. Ladies, you'll get extra credit. men, you will simply get your final project credit for that. And so that will be the that for us. Now, before I get some of your hands, last thing. This summer, I want to do an in-person retreat, women only, sorry, for the Song of Songs. And I want to know how many of you women would be interested. I'm looking at doing it over a week and maybe every night or something like that. But I want to do a real in-person retreat with, where we not only read it and study it, but reflect in our own lives what we can learn, how we can grow. So it's a much more practical. Kestenbaum wants to do his own retreat. I know. This is not. If I was a guy, I would do a retreat for you too. I need to meet that man that can take you out on retreats also. For now, it's just me. So I'm going to do this, and I would like, if you're interested in this retreat, any of you ladies, please stay after class. I'll get your email, and you can tell me already what times would be better, and that way I can contact you later on in the summer, and we can try and do this. So that would be centered on the Song of Songs. Okay, I see a few questions. Wagler, go ahead.
Are all the instructions for the final stuff, is that on the syllabus or no?
No, but I can write you like an announcement on Blackboard so that it's clear to everybody. Let me do that, right?
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good. And Ram, question?
No, not a question. Your book on Amazon is also on ebook, which I got in this.
It's expensive.
Well, I got it on ebook already, but it's just less expensive than the hard copy, I think.
How much did you get it for?
I bought it in the beginning of the semester. I will let you know.
Yeah, at the beginning of the semester, it sold for $25. I should have bought like 5.
I actually paid more. I think I paid more than 25 for it, but it was less than the actual hard copy.
Yeah, but it's still pricey. Like I'm really
it is. Yeah.
about this.
I was like, why is it so expensive? Why did you put a book so expensive?
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm going to make it a PDF and make it accessible online. That's like my decision now, because nobody's reading this because it's so expensive. I can't read it. So, okay, good. Kestenbaum?
Yeah, so in addition to this Amazon review, this final project, are we also going to have a separate test on the Book of John?
Oh, yeah. You have a test on the Book of John, normal test, but no final.
Okay, got it.
Final project is the final. Yeah, no test, no big test. Yeah, good.
How long should this review be? I could write paragraphs, but I don't want to bore you.
Oh, and you can put a bad review too. I don't mind. It'll balance things out. Although it look more authentic, right? If it's all good reviews, they're gonna sense I'm doing something. But if some of you have like less than good reviews, go for it, because that will like make it authentic, right? And I like to read it. I'd be happy to read it. So you really write the review honestly, right? I really want that to be an honest rendition, because then people take it more seriously than if everybody's like, it's amazing, no. I already had a couple friends do that for me, but I need you guys to be, more, very sincere. And yes, Taich, I'm trembling at what you're going to put in the review. Okay, let's see. Who is this? Somebody, I can't see this person. Ram, is that you with the hand? Yeah, you still have your hand, Ram. Okay, I think we're good. All right, guys. So yeah, women, if you're interested in the retreat, please just stay after, so I can, get your names or whatever and emails, and then the rest of you can go. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Oh yeah. You have to read John chapter 1 and 2. John 1 and 2 for next time.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
You're Professor.
Oh, real quick, can I stay, Professor? Even after the girls go?
So I'm trying to think. Yeah, I can have some of your questions. Yeah, sure.
Well, it's more of a discussion rather than questions, if you'd like.
No, I don't want to do discussion. I'm tired.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Just a question. Yeah, sorry. Long day.
Okay.
Wagler is still here?
Yeah, that's a reading assignment for chapters 11 and what was it, 1 and 2, or 11 and 12?
So
For
11
John.
and 12 is Ecclesiastes, which we finished already, and 1 and 2 is John.
And it's a reading assignment, right? We have to write a paper?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
For next time, John 1 and 2. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Ladies, you're interested in the workshop.
Yeah.
Wait, what is the workshop? That's my question.
Sorry, Aline, go ahead.
Like, what is it and like what would it entail?
Okay, so the way I wanted to do is to do it on the Song of Songs, but really in a way for us to learn to like navigate relationships. I think there's so much advice and wisdom in this text on how to navigate, especially difficult relationships that we are tempted to leave, right? There is so much going on there about, you know, female individuation, how to become a woman, how to, you know, how to develop your sensuality, how to go through the dark night of crisis in a relationship, right? So this book for me, I would love eventually to have it be like the main textbook for like sex education, for instance, right? The way it's taught today is all messed up. So you guys would be like the first, right? This is the beginning of a very big project that I want to do. I want this book to become like the manual on how to relate to the opposite sex, right? So there's a lot of wisdom in that book. So we won't only study the text together, but we'll do more practical exercises like we'll be more reflective, like where am I on that journey, how can I, like what is the issue that I'm dealing. So there will be more reflection, and I'll give you like some practical exercises to reflect. We'll be talking together, so it should be interesting. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But like what time and like when would it be and like that's important too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I want to talk to you guys about. What do you prefer, like a 1 day thing or like a 1 week thing with like evening time? Like, how would that work for you? I was thinking 1 day thing might be too much, but if we take a week and like every night we meet and then we end within a week, that would work too. But I'm just wondering what would be, or if you have a different time that you want to propose, what do you think? How would you do it?
I don't mind doing the week one. I think that's one way of having everything staying, you know, like what we're learning and experience. And when you do it 1 day at a time, I mean, once a week, it doesn't retain anything.
Yeah, once a week is not good. It would have to be more
Yeah,
intense, right? So
yeah.
I'm thinking like every night, maybe for 4 or 5 days, you know, and maybe meet like that. I mean, how would you guys? So I would just want to hear from you. Like, what would be ideal? Like Goldstein, how would you see this?
I'm not sure. um, I also I don't have my summer plans established yet, so I'm definitely potentially interested, but I don't know for sure.
Good. Okay.
But yeah, I think 1 day would be too much, but maybe either like you said, 4 or 5 nights, or over a weekend.
Or over a weekend, yeah. And Zoom or in person?
In person.
In person, right? That would be nice. Yeah, I think because we could meet outside potentially, right? So
Yeah, I think
be
I
okay.
like the idea of in person as well.
It would be nice, right, to get to know
Yeah.
each other at least in person. So okay, so and Pierre Antoine, how about you?
Yeah, like the 4 to 5 nights, like just spread it out, you know, to like internalize and just like regroup like the next day and talk about it. I like that idea. And evenings work fine, I think, at least for now.
From 7 to 9 or 6 to 8, what would be? How are your work schedules?
Right now, I'm not even sure how like
Everybody's
my
like,
schedule's gonna be. I would have to think. Definitely I'll email you about it.
yeah, and we can meet on campus, right? Is campus a good place to meet for y'all? It's kind of Goldstein, you're a little bit away, but
The only potential problem with campus is if they'll allow it, because right now you have to sign in.
that's right.
Yeah.
So I live close to campus anyway, so it could be my house. So, but I mean, is that location pretty close to most of you? Terms, because you're all in Queens, right? So, okay, good. So, why don't you email me? Just email me, like, put your full name, so have your actual email, and then just tell me I'm interested. That way I know to gather your email and collect you, and that way I contact you later on in the summer to organize this. So let's do that. Just email me right now, and that way I have you down. Any other questions?
Can I talk to you for a minute after this?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks.
I kind of have a few words to say as well. So I mean, whoever wants to go first, I don't mind. I'll what's called mute. So I'll mute myself so I don't get
Yeah,
in the way.
that
But
works. Sure. Goldstein, you need to be first or second for this.
Okay, we're done here, right?
Yeah, we're done, Ram. Don't
Okay,
forget to email.
I'll email you.
Perfect. And
Yeah, thank
likewise,
you.
Pierre-Antoine, Alim, you can email me.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a
Pierre-Antoine,
good
you-
weekend.
Sorry, bye, Alim. You have anything else, Pierre-Antoine, you want to talk about also?
Just can you put main stage in a breakout room? Because he said he wanted to talk to me. So, if that's okay,
And what? Can I
a
what?
breakout room.
You?
Yeah, it would stay.
Oh, with Stage? Stage?
Yeah.
You want to go with Pierre-Antoine to...
no, I'd like to talk to Pierre and the professor real quick. Goldstein can stay. That's fine.
Goldstein, you want to be last? Hold on, Stage. You want to be last?
If
I'll email you.
possible, with because I have something to say to you and Pierre. I'm sorry.
Okay, cool.
I just want to say a few things.
Okay, I'll email you, Professor. Thank
No,
you.
it's okay, Goldstein. You want to go first or last? I don't care. What do you need? Do you need to go?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll put you guys in a breakout room, okay, for now. And then I'll bring you back in. So let's see. Create breakout rooms. That way you can also discuss your discuss what you need to discuss.
And the recording is still on.